Oh, you're here. Good. I've got another betrayal story for you. Sit down. I used to think my father was the kind of man history would remember fondly. But the night I realized his past wasn't what he claimed, I learned some truths don't free you. They burn everything down. My name is David Carter. I'm 28, and I teach history at the same high school I once sat in as a kid. It's not a glamorous life, but I love it. Teaching students how to piece together the past, how to chase down stories buried in dusty archives, feels like passing on something important. I always told them that history isn't just dates and wars. It's family, the bloodline stories, the migrations, the truths people carry or bury. I believe that when you know where you come from, you know who you are. That was before my own family tree splintered beneath me. The first crack came years earlier, when I was 12. I was in the garage, hunting for an old baseball glove, when I found a locked metal box tucked beneath a workbench. It wasn't much bigger than a toolbox, heavy, with a keyhole that seemed out of place in our messy, ordinary garage. I dragged it into the light, curious. My father caught me before I could touch it. His face twisted with a look I'd never seen before, not anger, not disappointment, but something closer to fear. "Don't ever touch that again," he barked, yanking it out of my hands and shoving it back under the bench. I froze, wide-eyed. My father wasn't a man who raised his voice often. He usually carried himself with calm authority, the kind that made people trust him instantly. But that day, his voice cracked like a whip. I never asked again, never tried to open it. Still, the image of that box stuck with me through the years, a ghost rattling in the corner of my memory. Fast forward to the present. Last fall, I was running a genealogy project with my students. It was one of my favorite assignments, teaching them how to trace roots, pull birth records, and gather stories from family members. To show them how it worked, I decided to use my own family as a demonstration. That's when the cracks came back, sharper and deeper. I started simple, pulling up my father's birth records. The problem was, they didn't match. His birth certificate listed a place I'd never heard him mention, a year different from the one I'd celebrated in every birthday toast. And when I compare it with other documents, his driver's license, old tax forms, even the details on his company registration, the dates and locations refused to line up. At first, I thought it was a clerical error. Records get messy, I told myself. But the deeper I looked, the less sense it made. Whole chapters of his life had blank spots, like someone had taken scissors to our family album and snipped out the truth. That night, I sat across from him at the dinner table, papers spread out like evidence. "Dad," I said carefully, "why do these records say you were born in Chicago when you've always said Cleveland? And why does one list you as 39 when another says 40? The air seemed to freeze. My mother looked up from her plate, fork trembling in her hand. My sister, Sarah, blinked confused, but my father's eyes went hard. "Where did you get those?" His voice was low, dangerous. "They're public records," I said. "I was showing my students how to build a family tree." You thought wrong." He slammed his fist against the table, making the plates rattle. My mother flinched. Sarah gasped. I'd never seen him like that. His calm stripped away, replaced by something raw and furious. "Drop it, David," he snarled. "Leave the past buried where it belongs." I sat there in silence, my heart pounding. For a moment, I almost backed down. I could have nodded, shoved the papers aside, pretended none of it mattered. That's what he wanted. That's what my mother's pleading eyes begged me to do. But I couldn't, because underneath his anger, I saw it again, that flicker of fear I remembered from the garage 16 years earlier. He wasn't angry that I found inconsistencies. He was terrified, and that was all the confirmation I needed. I didn't push him further that night. I gathered the papers, tucked them back into my folder, and left the table without another word. He thought silence meant surrender. He thought I'd learned my lesson. But the truth was, I just learned something else. My father was hiding more than bad paperwork. That lockbox in the garage hadn't been a fluke. The anger, the contradictions, the missing pieces, they weren't accidents. They were threads leading somewhere dark. I lay awake for hours at night, staring at the ceiling, replaying his voice. Leave the past buried. But history is all I know. Buried things don't stay buried forever. Instead of scaring me off, his outburst lit a fire I couldn't put out. If my father was hiding something, I was going to find it, no matter what it costs. My father's fury didn't silence me. It made the cracks louder. When you spend years teaching students to dig through archives, to compare sources and cross-check details, you can't just shrug off inconsistencies. They itch at you. They demand answers. That's what happened to me. Every time I tried to sleep, I heard his voice echoing, "Leave the past buried." But the more I turned it over my mind, the more I knew he hadn't been protecting me. He'd been protecting himself. So I went back to the beginning. Archives, public records, town registries, places most people never bother looking. I spent hours at the county office, scrolling through scanned documents until my eyes burned. Names, dates, property lines, all the dull details most people overlook. But patterns started to form. First, I found a company name I didn't recognize. Then another, shell companies, technically registered to my father, but without employees, without real addresses. On paper, they existed. In practice, they were empty shells. And yet, money flowed through them. Steady, quiet siphons pulling from accounts I couldn't trace. At first, I thought I was reading it wrong. I called Paul my closest friend since college. He worked in IT, the kind of guy who could tear apart a database for fun. One look at the paperwork I'd copied, and his expression shifted. "David, this isn't sloppy bookkeeping," he said. "This is laundering. Someone's moving money on purpose." My stomach sank. The deeper we dug, the more obvious it became. Property deeds scattered under different names. False identities, all tracing back to addresses connected to my father. I held one deed in my hand, staring at a signature that wasn't his, but I'd seen that handwriting before. He hadn't even bothered to disguise it well. At home, I tried to hide the research. Late nights with documents spread across my desk, the faint glow of my laptop lighting up the walls. But Maria, my mother, wasn't blind. She'd pass by the study, see me bend over files, my coffee going cold, and her face would pale. "David," she whispered one night, standing in the doorway, "please, don't do this." I looked up, startled. "Don't do what?" "Don't dig. Your father has worked hard for this family. Whatever you think you're finding, it'll only hurt us." Her voice shook, and for the first time, I saw fear in her eyes. Not just fear of losing him, but fear of what would happen if the truth came out. She wasn't asking me to stop for his sake. She was asking me to stop for hers. But I couldn't. I tried to reassure her. "Mom, if there's nothing to hide, there's nothing to worry about." She didn't answer. She just closed the door softly and walked away. The sound of her footsteps down the hall felt heavier than any file I'd uncovered. Paul pushed me further. He set up tools I didn't even understand, combing through digital trails, old tax filings, and cross-reference IDs. One night, he called me at 2 a.m. "You'd better sit down," he said. He'd found tax documents that should have been filed but never were, missing filings from the companies tied to my father, millions of dollars unaccounted for. It wasn't sloppy mistakes. It wasn't carelessness. It was deliberate. I remember staring at the screen, my pulse hammering. My father, the man who taught me honesty, who lectured me about integrity, who I once thought would be remembered as a pillar of our community, was a liar. Worse than a liar. He was siphoning money through shadows, building an empire deceit under the same roof where I grew up. I want to confront him right then, slam the evidence on the table, and demand answers. But I thought of his face when I asked about the records, the sudden, violent anger. I thought of my mother's pale expression, her whispered plea to stop. If I brought this out too soon, he'd bury it deeper, destroy the trail before I could prove it. So I stayed quiet. To him, at least. To my mother and sister, I acted like everything was fine. To Paul, I confessed the truth I could no longer deny. My father's building his life on lies. Paul didn't sugarcoat it. Then you need to decide how far you're willing to go to uncover them. I didn't answer. Not then. Because the truth was, I didn't know. All I knew was this: the box in the garage, the documents in my hands, the lies I kept unearthing. They weren't accidents. They were pieces of something much bigger, something dangerous. And once you start pulling on threads like that, you can't put them back. If the money trail was damning, the personal trail was devastating. I'd gotten used to staring at numbers on a screen, shell companies' deeds, tax filings, but nothing prepared me for what I found when I drifted into the archives of the county courthouse. I was there on a quiet afternoon, combing through old property ledgers, when a different record popped up under my father's name. At first, I thought it was another fake identity, another alias he used for business. But no, the name was his, the date was his, and right beneath it, in faded ink, was something I couldn't believe: a marriage license. My father had been married before my mother. I sat there frozen, the paper trembling in my hand. Thomas Carter, age 22, is married to a woman named Linda Cooper. The date stamped across the top was nearly a decade before the wedding photos that hung in our hallway. I flipped the page. My chest tightened as I saw another document stapled to it: court filings, custody disputes, child support agreements. My father hadn't just been married. He had a child. I ran my hand down the page, reading words that blurred together. Failure to appear, support unpaid, custodial rights terminated. It felt like someone had kicked me in the ribs. The man who raised me, who taught me how to ride a bike, who told me every night that family was sacred, had already abandoned one family before us. I copied everything I could get my hands on. That night, Paul came over and helped me track the threads. We ran the mother's name through databases, cross-reference addresses, and pulled up property records. That's when I saw it. A current address, only 2 towns over, tied to someone named Aaron Cooper. The name alone was a punch. Aaron, that's his son, I whispered. Paul leaned back in his chair. David, if this is real, then you have a brother. I wanted to deny it. I wanted to believe it was a coincidence, a mistake, a glitch in the records. But the more we looked, the clearer it became. Aaron wasn't just real. He was living a stone's throw away from me. I couldn't sleep. The next day, I drove out, 2 towns over, down a side street where houses leaned a little too close together and the paint peeled from old porches. I found him, Aaron Cooper, mid-30s, broad-shouldered, with the same sharp eyes I saw every time I looked in the mirror. For a moment, I sat in the car, gripping the wheel, my throat dry. Then I forced myself out and knocked on the door. He opened it, suspicion written all over his face. Can I help you? My name's David Carter, I said, my voice catching. I think I'm your brother. Silence. Then he laughed, sharp and bitter. Of course you are. Took you long enough to figure it out. He didn't slam the door. He didn't call me crazy. He let me in. The inside of his house was modest, cluttered, but lived in. Family photos lined the mantel, none of which featured the man we share by blood. He poured himself a drink and didn't offer me one. You want to know what it's like? Aaron asked, his tone flat. To grow up with a father who pretends you don't exist? I swallowed hard. I didn't know. He never told me. Of course he didn't. Aaron set his glass down hard enough to make it clink. He left when I was 4. Never paid support. My mom worked 2 jobs while he played family man with yours. You know what's worse than being abandoned? Being erased. He didn't just leave us. He rewrote himself like we were a mistake. Every word felt like a blade carving deeper into me. I wanted to defend myself, To tell him I hadn't known, that I'd grown up believing my father was a good man. But the look on Aaron's face stopped me. He wasn't blaming me. He was laying bare the truth. I used to watch him from afar, Aaron continued, his voice quieter now. When I was a teenager, I'd see him at the grocery store, smiling with your mom, with you. He looked right through me like I was nobody. You ever wonder what that does to a kid? I couldn't answer. Aaron leaned back, his eyes hard. So now you know. Congratulations. You get to decide what to do with it. Me? I stopped caring a long time ago. He's your problem now. I left his house in a daze. The drive home felt endless, the road blurring under my headlights. Every word Aaron said replayed in my head. My father hadn't just stolen money. He'd stolen a childhood, a life, a son. He'd rewritten his past like a bad draft, pretending the first version never existed. When I pulled into our driveway, the house looked the same as it always had. Porch light glowing, curtains drawn, a picture of stability. But I knew better now. The foundation had already been cracked long before I was born. I sat there in the car, gripping the steering wheel, my chest tight. The truth hit me with full weight. My father didn't just hide money. He erased a life. The deeper I dug, the more resistance I faced, not just from my father, but from the people who still loved him. Word must have spread, because the first confrontation didn't come from my dad. It came from Uncle Robert. He showed up at my place one evening, unannounced, his heavy frame filling the doorway like a storm cloud. I'd always known Robert as a fun uncle, the one with the jokes and the extra candy at holidays. But there was no trace of that man when he stepped inside. He closed the door behind him and looked me dead in the eye. "You need to stop, David." I stayed silent, letting him say what he came to say. "You think you're doing some noble crusade? You're not. You're tearing this family apart, digging where you don't belong." His jaw tightened. "Your father has his reasons for what he's done. Leave it buried." The word sent a chill through me. You know, don't you? Robert's silence was all the confirmation I needed. His eyes shifted away, and when he finally spoke, it was a whisper. I knew about Linda, about the boy, but that was a lifetime ago. It doesn't matter anymore. I felt my stomach twist. It matters to him, Robert. Aaron grew up without a father, while mine played happy family with us. That's not ancient history. That's a wound still bleeding. Robert's expression hardened. "Don't act like you're some savior. You'll destroy your mother with this. You'll destroy Sarah. Think about the people who stayed, not the ones who left." I wanted to shout at him, tell him he was just as guilty for keeping the secret. But instead I said quietly, the truth doesn't disappear because you ignore it. It just rots in the dark. He shook his head, muttering under his breath, and left without another word. The slam of the door echoed through the house like a warning shot. The next blow came from Sarah, my little sister, the one who used to trail behind me at family barbecues, the one I promised to always protect. She cornered me in the kitchen a few nights later, her face red, eyes blazing. "What are you doing to Dad?" she snapped. I blinked. "What am I doing?" "Sarah, I'm uncovering what he's done. You don't understand." "No!" She cut me off, slamming her hand on the counter. "I understand perfectly. You're inventing lies. You've always been jealous of him. Now you're trying to smear him, ruin everything he's built." The word stung more than I wanted to admit. "Jealous? You think I want to find this? You think I wanted to meet the brother he abandoned?" Her face twisted in confusion and anger. "There is no brother. You're sick, David. You're obsessed with tearing him down." For a moment, I saw it. How easy it would be for her to cling to denial, to believe the man who tucked her in at night couldn't be the same man who walked away from another child. I didn't argue further. I just said, "One day, Sarah, the truth is going to hit you whether you want it to or not. And when it does, don't say I didn't warn you." She stormed out, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the dishes in the cabinets. But the hardest confrontation wasn't from Robert or Sarah. It was from my mother. It happened late at night. I was in the study again, documents spread across the desk, when I heard the soft creak of the door. Maria stood there, pale, her hands trembling as she held the frame. "David," she whispered, "please stop this." Her voice cracked, and my heart sank. She stepped in, her eyes glistening. I can't pretend I didn't know. Not everything, but enough. Your father, there were things I never asked about. The times he disappeared. Stories that didn't add up. I thought if I stayed quiet, if I just kept the peace, it would keep our family together. Her tears slipped down her cheeks. But you're digging like this. It's going to destroy everything we have left. I stood, torn in two. Mom, don't you see? He already destroyed it. Years ago. I'm just pulling back the curtain. She shook her head, covering her face. I was afraid of this. Afraid the truth would come out and nothing would survive it. Afraid of losing him, afraid of losing you. Hearing that broke something inside me. My mother had lived with the weight of suspicion for years, choosing silence over confrontation, love over truth. I stepped closer, placing a hand on her shoulder. I can't stop, Mom. I wish I could, but it's too late. Too many lives have been hurt because we've all kept quiet. I won't do it anymore. She didn't answer. She just wept quietly, her shoulders shaking beneath my hand. And in that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting my father. I was fighting the whole web of silence that held our family together. And I was ready to break it. By then, it wasn't just me chasing shadows. Others had been circling my father for years. The night after my mother's breakdown, I sat in the study, surrounded by papers. My desk looked less like a teacher's and more like a crime scene board. Names, dates, bank records spread out in neat, obsessive stacks. I stared at the numbers, my pen tapping against the wood. I had enough evidence to know my father was guilty. But was it enough to do something about it? That question gnawed at me until Maria's whisper replayed in my head. He used Sarah's tuition fund as collateral. I brushed it off in the moment, too focused on comforting her. But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. My father hadn't just lied or cheated or abandoned a family decades ago. He was actively bleeding us dry. Sarah's education, Lily's future savings, my mother's security. Aaron's words echoed, too. If you don't stop him, he'll do to you what he did to me. And then Paul, blunt as always. David, if the feds trace us back and see you knew you're complicit, that was it, my breaking point. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was survival. I wasn't turning on my father out of spite. I was trying to protect what little was left of the family he hadn't already destroyed. I called Paul first. Help me put this together. Everything. Clean, organized, airtight. He came over the next night, carrying his laptop and a stack of external drives. We worked side by side, cross-referencing records, pulling digital footprints, and highlighting the most damning connections. Shell companies are tied directly to Thomas's social security number. Deeds signed in false names, but deposited into accounts that led back to him. Tax filings are conspicuously missing year after year. Hours bled into dawn. My eyes burned, my hands cramped, but when we finally leaned back, we had it. A data trail. Not fragments. Not suspicions. Proof. That's when I made the call. Mark Holden was an investigator I'd heard about through whispers in town. A quiet presence at council meetings. A name that popped up in news articles about financial crimes. I dialed his office number, half expecting to hang up before he answered. But when his voice came through, steady professional, I forced myself to speak. My name's David Carter, I said. I think you're investigating my father. There was a pause, the kind that feels heavier than silence. Then, come in tomorrow morning. Bring what you have. I almost dropped the phone. The next day, I walked into a sterile government building, clutching a folder so tight my knuckles turned white. Mark was waiting in a conference room. Mid-40s, sharp suit, the kind of man who looked like he hadn't slept in weeks. "Sit down," he said, gesturing to the chair across from him. I slid the folder across the table. He opened it, flipping through documents, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. After a while, he closed it, folded his hands, and looked me dead in the eye. "You know what this is, right?" I nodded. My throat felt like sandpaper. "Money laundering. Fraud. Worse. We've been circling your father for years," Mark admitted. "We knew he was dirty, but we could never tie the shell companies back to him directly. Until now." He tapped the folder. "This is the missing link." I should have felt vindicated. Instead, I felt sick. My father wasn't just my father anymore. He was a target in a criminal case, and I was the one who put him there. Paul's voice in my ear kept me steady. "If you stay quiet, you're part of it." Mark leaned forward. "This won't be easy. Your family will take the hit. But if you want this to stop, this is the way." I nodded slowly. "Do it." The days that followed were a blur of dread. I went through the motions at school, teaching lessons on revolutions and dictators while waiting for one to explode in my own home. My mother barely spoke. Sarah avoided me altogether. My father, blissfully unaware, still carried himself like the king of our castle. Then it happened. It was a Friday morning when the knock rattled the front door. I was in the kitchen, pouring coffee. My father answered, irritation already bubbling in his tone. "Who the hell?" The door burst open. Federal agents swarmed inside, badges flashing, voices booming commands. "Thomas Carter, you're under arrest for fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering." My mother screamed, collapsing onto the floor, sobs racking her body. Sarah clutched her, tears streaming down her face, confusion and rage twisting her features. I stood frozen as they cuffed my father, his hands behind his back, his suit disheveled for the first time I could remember. His eyes scanned the room until they found me. And then he knew. The look he gave me wasn't confusion. It wasn't betrayal. It was pure hatred, like I had ripped away his mask and left him naked in the firelight. "You!" he spat, voice low, venom dripping. I didn't answer. As they dragged him out, Sarah turned on me, her face twisted in anguish. "You did this. You destroyed our family." Her words hit harder than any blow. My mother's sobs joined hers, a chorus of grief that cut deeper than any agent's command. I wanted to scream back that I hadn't destroyed anything, that I'd only exposed what was already broken. But the words died in my throat, because in that moment, standing in the wreckage of my family, I wasn't sure she was wrong. After the raid, silence filled the house where laughter used to live. Days bled into nights without a word spoken at the dinner table. My mother barely left her bedroom, blinds drawn, her sobs muffled through the walls. Sarah didn't look at me, didn't acknowledge me when we passed in the hall. I'd lost count of how many times I opened my mouth to explain, to tell her I hadn't destroyed the family. I'd only uncovered the truth, but she wouldn't have listened. Maybe she couldn't. Our house, once filled with the easy noise of family life, had become a mausoleum. Every photograph on the walls seemed to glare at me, a reminder of what I'd broken open. Aaron was the only one who didn't recoil from me. He came by a few days after the raid, standing awkwardly on the porch until I let him in. He looked around, his eyes lingering on the walls, the polished furniture, the framed pictures of birthdays and vacations. "This was your life?" he asked softly. I nodded, shame tightening in my chest. He let out a bitter laugh. "He really did erase me, didn't he? Whole new family, new house, new story." I wanted to apologize, but what words could possibly cover decades of abandonment? Instead, I said, "I'm sorry you had to carry that alone." Aaron's face softened just enough for me to see the pain beneath the anger. "You did the right thing, David," exposing him. But his voice cracked. "It doesn't undo anything. My mom still worked herself to the bone to raise me. I still grew up fatherless while he sat here playing family man. Nothing changes that. I nodded. I knew he was right. The truth might bring justice, but it couldn't rewrite history. A week later, we were called to court for the indictment hearing. I sat in the gallery beside Paul, who had insisted on coming with me, while Maria and Sarah sat on the opposite side, cold and distant. My father entered in chains, his suit replaced by a drab prison uniform, his hair disheveled, but his eyes still carried that iron glare. When he looked at me, it wasn't as a father to a son. It was a predator to prey. His stare drilled into me, unblinking, filled with venom. In that moment, I understood I wasn't his child anymore. I was his enemy. The charges were red: fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering. Each word felt like another nail in the coffin of the man I thought I knew. My mother wept quietly. Sarah glared at me with the same hatred my father did, as if my exposing him was a true crime. I left the courtroom feeling hollow. That night, unable to sleep, I wandered into the garage. The same smell of oil and dust hit me, the same shadows that had cloaked my childhood curiosity. And there it was, the lockbox, still tucked under the workbench, untouched for 16 years. I pulled it into the light, brushing away cobwebs, running my hand across the cold metal. The same keyhole stared back at me, daring me to open it. For a long time, I considered it. My heart pounded as I imagined what might be inside. Documents, cash, maybe the very records that had haunted me all these years. Answers, perhaps. Closure. But then it struck me, I didn't need to open it. I already had. Not the box, but the man. My father's life had been the real Pandora's box, and I'd already unleashed everything inside. Lies, betrayal, the truth that poisoned everything it touched. Opening this metal container wouldn't change that. I shoved the box back on the bench and stood, dusting off my hands like I was burying it all over again. When New Year's came, fireworks popped in the distance, muffled through the night air. Families cheered, glasses clinked, neighbors hugged on porches. But not in our house. Maria stayed in her room. Sarah had gone to friends. The walls held nothing but silence. I stood on the porch alone, watching the sky light up in colors, and realized I'd entered the new year with no family beside me. The truth had cost me everything, but it also freed me, because no matter how much it hurt, no matter how shattered we were, the lies were no longer in control. And for me, that had to be enough. If you uncovered secrets about your own father that could tear your family apart, would you keep digging or let the past stay buried? And if telling the truth meant losing everyone close to you, would you still do it? Let me know in the comments. And if you want more betrayal stories like this, hit subscribe.